Hello and welcome to Draft Day. My name is John Fleming. I am one of the hosts of Draft Day, joined by one of the other hosts of Draft Day, Jason Bradshaw. Jason, how are you doing?
I am fantastic, John. Looking forward to another wonderful sports draft after some deviation.
Yeah, we're going back to our roots. We are going back to the first sport we covered on Draft Day, which is the National Football League. Unlike the previous draft we did, which was post Rams relocation, this is going to be a draft that was while the St. Louis Rams were in existence, and honestly the first draft that I really remember in any kind of way, and that is why I'm personally excited to do it. We are going to 1998. The St. Louis Rams had the number 6 draft pick that year. They selected Grant Wistrom out of the University of Nebraska. And will he be the number 6 pick in the redraft? We'll just have to wait and find out. But this is one of the truly legendary drafts in NFL history. I would venture to say that it is the draft following what's probably the most iconic Heisman finalist group of all time. And that is despite the fact that one of the Heisman finalists is one of the most iconic busts of all time in the NFL and Ryan Leaf. But you had Charles Woodson winning it. You had Peyton Manning and Randy Moss as two of the other finalists. Those are 3 Pro Football Hall of Famers, 3 obvious Pro Football Hall of Famers, and I'm gonna go on a limb and guess that all 3 of these guys are probably gonna get drafted here.
it's a good bet. That's a good bet.
Yeah, we'll see what the exact order is, but one thing I will note about this draft, I think that there's a little bit of a false memory associated with the supposed Peyton Manning Ryan Leaf binary of it all, which is that every once in a while I'll even see people make fun of the Chargers for choosing Ryan Leaf over Peyton Manning. They didn't have a choice.
Yeah,
They could have
Peyton
obviously
Manning wins first.
Yeah, and if you look back at what mock drafts exist at that time, and there's certainly a lot fewer than there are today, Peyton Manning was kind of the prohibitive guy, and there was a lot of support for Ryan Leaf. It's not like people were saying he was drafted too high when he went number 2, but I think the Peyton Manning, the problem with the Chargers they could have had, like I said, the defending Heisman winner became a Hall of Famer, or another Heisman finalist that became a Hall of Famer, and they took a guy who, was a bit of a head case, to put lightly.
Yeah, I mean, don't want to harp on, Ryan Leaf too much. I mean, he's hardly the first or will hardly be the last highly touted picked QB to be an NFL bust. I mean,
yeah, and I think that and he's honestly had a lot of honest reflection on it, because he's had some lows in his life, off the field too. He had some drug issues. He spent some time in jail. He's bounced back mostly pretty well, and he's gone on to be a pretty actually a pretty good football broadcaster. Usually on kind of low levels of it, and every once in a while he'll kind of come up in public discourse. I remember, I think it was somebody kind of going back to criticize Johnny Manziel, saying that Johnny Manziel was the biggest Heisman NFL bust since Ryan Leaf, and Ryan Leaf was I wish. I wish I had a Heisman. And it's nice to see somebody be a good sport about it, but
yeah, I mean that's but like you said, super deep draft, and a draft that of a lot of the top players. I think you're going to see a lot of first round guys. This first round hit pretty decently well in terms of becoming productive NFL players.
And looking at my list, there are multiple guys who were top 10 picks who aren't in my top 20, but that I would not by any means call busts. This is just a really strong and deep draft.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that includes, I believe it's 4 Hall of Famers plus quite a few other guys who you can make Hall of Fame cases for.
Absolutely. Yeah, there were some guys I was like, oh wow, we'll get to them, but there were a few guys I'm like, wow, they're not in the Hall of Fame. Okay, yeah, just would have thought they were.
There's a couple undrafted guys we're going to figure out pretty highly, at least on my board as well. But shall we get started?
Yep. You have the honors as the winner of pool, so
That's correct.
you may take the first pick. That may be a chalk pick. I don't know, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that while it is deep, I think that number one probably isn't going to be a huge surprise. I'm going to take Manning. He's a 5-time MVP. He is the top player in this draft by the advanced metrics. He is like, I would say conservatively a top 3 quarterback of all time in terms of just like total career accomplishments. I tend to kind of be in the camp that like Tom Brady eventually passed him. I would argue that when Peyton Manning retired, he would have been my number one, but then Tom Brady won an additional like 3 Super Bowls and had a bunch of other really good seasons after that. But yeah, 7-time first team All Pro, which is actually 6 times more than Tom Brady was, which is honestly kind of crazy. But he was a guy who, and so his first season, he threw a lot of interceptions. His last season with Denver, even though they won the Super Bowl, like basically Von Miller won the Super Bowl for them, he just kind of like did enough. But basically, between those seasons, he was the greatest weapon really in the NFL. And I can't even really articulate why he was so great. He was like infamously slow. He had a pretty strong arm, but I don't think anyone ever thought he had the greatest arm in the NFL. Really though, like when you hear him break down games now on like the Manning cast on Monday Night Football, he just is so smart. He just knows every beat. He's a super charismatic guy and a beloved figure to this day in Indianapolis, and I assume in Denver as well, just because like the first couple years in Denver especially, he was like as good as he ever was. And after like he had that neck injury in 2011, it kind of looked like his career might be over, and he was a Hall of Famer already just with the Indy years. But then he has that second chapter in Denver, which then was like Tom Brady had his second chapter in Tampa. So he kind of replicated that, but really there wasn't really a lot of precedent for somebody who was that good in one spot and then was that good against somewhere else. You'd have to go to like non-quarterbacks. You have to go to like Reggie White or somebody to find anybody that's even remotely comparable.
Yeah, I mean, a guy who just, like you said, just his understanding of the game of football was ahead of its time, I think, in terms of just the preparation. A guy who was essentially calling his offense from the line. Something we didn't really see up to that point. At least not to those levels. I remember watching The Greatest Show on Turf, obviously growing up, but that was Martz calling in the plays. Kurt Warner wasn't, looking at him and Omaha and every player, whatever. But, and just like, an easy guy to like you said, with the charisma. I'll always think of the SNL hosting and stuff like that, when he had the sketch where he was chucking balls at like the Boys and Girls Club kids and just like yelling at them for not catching it and stuff. It's fantastic. But
I would say that Peyton's charisma, like his charisma, is also just so unusual because it's like sort of anti-charisma, because it's not like unlike Tom Brady, where he's like the handsomest guy in the room kind of guy. Like he's like kind of a goofy, kind of aw shucks kind of guy. He seems very down to earth, even though his dad is like a borderline Hall of Fame quarterback in his own right.
Mm-hmm. Brother too.
And I think Peyton, and I think Peyton is like kind of underrated in terms of how influential he is. Like you mentioned, with a lot of that kind of like improvisational kind of stuff. Like people think about like improvisation as being like Michael Vick or somebody who's a lot faster, but I think if you look at a guy like Patrick Mahomes or a guy like Josh Allen, obviously both those guys, particularly Allen, are way faster than Peyton Manning ever was. But just in terms of like the way that he approaches the game, I think actually is way closer to the modern conception of what we associate with a quarterback, even than Brady, even though Brady was playing as of a couple seasons ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's you know, it like I remember watching, him play at times and just, the throws that he would make sometimes. You're like, well, that, you know, is going to be intercepted, no doubt, and just like the perfect pinpoint that he had just at any given time. And never really seemed to get rattled. But yeah, I mean, and I think he's a reason that we started to maybe even look at some of the things like whether it was Wonderlic or you think about guys like Alex Smith, who's like he's off the charts intelligent. But
yeah, but I think a lot of it's also just like Peyton has like a feel for the game that's just really
agreed. It's one of those things you're like, this is what this dude was really born to do, like, is to be around the game of football. I wonder if he'll get into coaching one day. Probably making pretty good money on the TV side right now, so probably no need to.
I suspect he's probably happy making the money he's making right now, putting in, I'm sure, way fewer hours.
Oh yeah, it's be interesting to see, if because I believe he has children, so as they get older or something, it'd be interesting to see if they start playing. If he takes, be interesting to see how they turn out, or and I don't know anything about his parenting style, so it's obviously he has a nephew who's a pretty highly touted quarterback recruit, but
even though he won't be in the college football video game, that's true.
Yes, or starting, but
yeah,
in his second year either. SEC anyway. Get that money. I won't get into the conversation that Nick Saban started at his retirement interview.
Yeah.
But
all right.
But as a fun transition to that, I don't know if you know this, but Nick Saban from West Virginia. You know who else is from the state of West Virginia, John?
Jason Williams.
No, it was my mother.
Jason Williams, however, was a high school teammate of
my pick at number 2, Randy Moss. All right. Like, for my money, like, maybe the one or two most dominant wide receivers I've ever seen play the game of football. Like, nothing against, like, Jerry Rice was great, but I never considered him like just like an imposing dominant force. I guess like the numbers don't lie with Jerry, but like Randy Moss and Calvin Johnson would be the one I'd put him up against in terms of just freakish athletes, kind of a thing. I mean,
they're the two guys that like built in a lab kind of guys.
Yeah, maybe Larry Fitzgerald to an extent, but like you said, I mean, first of all, to just be a straight wide receiver at a not very big school and be a Heisman finalist, like
in their first year of being Division 1A school too.
Yeah, he's crazy. I mean, this is a guy who, 962 yards or receptions, over 15,000 receiving yards. And didn't have a short career, played roughly 12, 13 seasons. Won Rookie of the Year in this class. I mean, I know firsthand in '99, I remember watching him in the playoffs, that first, Rams game, and just being like, holy cow. Like, I was a 9-year-old kid, so I didn't necessarily know everything about Randy Moss. I wasn't following college football that closely. And frankly, that was the first time I'd followed the Rams because they were worth following as a kid when they got good. But, like the epitome of a guy, it's like, throw the ball up there, I'll go get it. And has made a nice little second career for himself, commentating. Is he still at ESPN? I think.
He is, yeah.
Part of like the Monday Night Crew or whatever. So, and has some good insight. I mean, from a lot of things that I hear through different videos, it seemed like he's actually, a pretty good teammate for the most part. Like, just seems like he's kind of, not to harp on it, but like fairly a genuinely good dude. Like, comes from, I mean, and if you heard his story of what he came from. Like, for him to come out and be this to begin with is pretty incredible. I mean,
yeah, and the legal issues that he had, because like they were well documented as far as why he ended up at Marshall at the first place.
Yeah.
It was like drug possession, and
Yeah.
he was like adjacently involved in a fight, but like pretty much everybody involved says he was just kind of there. He wasn't like
he wasn't
instigating it or anything.
And to be fair too, it's like, you know, to judge him, even if he had been, you know, more involved in some of that stuff, like, we all do stupid crap when we're in high school. Like,
Yeah.
whether, you know, and I think obviously in terms of things like a drug possession charge kind of thing, you can't, you know, that could be a whole nother debate, I'm sure. But like, you know, to my knowledge, at least didn't really have any, you know, big issues when he was in the NFL with people and stuff. He, you know, did it several places, obviously Minnesota where he made his mark. Then he had that weird stint in Oakland for a couple of years. And we're like, is this the end?
England is.
Yeah. And then 07 New England happened, and you're like, oh, shoot. Like, he back. Like I think he finished second in the, like, offensive player of the year voting that year in the AP. So
I think it was second to Brady, too.
Yeah, like to his quarterback.
So, yeah.
You know, they were clicking. He found his kind of second life there, and then, you know, after he left New England, had kind of a hard time locking anything down. You know, played a couple of games here and there. Then he had that last year with San Francisco where he, you know, was there, had 20 catches for 434 yards, 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Like,
and that was like fair, post prime, yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, like a lot of guys would take that as a stat line as an NFL wide receiver, you know, kind of a thing. So, you know, he's Randy Moss. Like, to me, like, the other funny thing that I'll never understand, like, we needed the fake mooning in Detroit, I think it was, and Joe Buck got
it was in Green Bay.
Or Green Bay, and Joe Buck got so upset at it. I'm like, I thought it was hilarious. Like, it's not like, first of all, he didn't actually do it. He didn't pull his pants down.
Yeah, it was like, I would say it was an overreaction. Like, if you want to say that you don't think that it was like, you know, to borrow a line from the soon-to-be released Anchorman, if you don't think he's staying classy or whatever, like, I get that, but I'm also not going to make that big of a deal about it. And that was kind of the thing with Randy Moss, is like a lot of the things that people would get mad about, I think, were blown way out of proportion. There was the moon thing. There was the, like, he was pretty open about basically saying, I think he just didn't phrase it necessarily the best way. He basically was like, yeah, I don't always try my best. But basically he's just saying, hey, I, like, go all out, like, all the time. And eventually I'm going to, like, need a breather. So sometimes I'm not, you know, I'm not Pete Rose. I'm not just, like, being a tryhard for the sake of being a tryhard. I need to just kind of, you know, conserve myself. And that's how I'm able to do this. Because, like you said, like, Randy Moss is, like, he fits every box of what you would want in a receiver. He's huge. He's as fast as anybody. He's an incredible jumper, an incredible physical player. That said, I actually had him at number 3 on my list, which, and I think that while I think a lot of the talk about him is a little bit overdone, and I think that his reputation suffered a lot more than it should have, I think that there is something to the fact that, you know, he had that falling out in Oakland, that he had a falling out eventually in New England. And, you know, he was number 3 on my list, to be fair. It's not like I was like, oh, I'm not going to draft him.
You dropped him way down. So.
Yeah, so for my number 2 pick, I'm taking Charles Woodson. Woodson, also a Hall of Famer. He was a 3-time first-team All-Pro, 4-time second team, 9 Pro Bowls, just an absolutely, like, maniacally good player. Somebody who was, you know, one of, if not the best cornerbacks in the NFL for a really long time. You know, he's most famously was with the Raiders, but also had a really strong run in Green Bay, where he was Defensive Player of the Year one time, which almost never happens as a cornerback, but, you know, just a real, like, premier player. And, you know, the fact that he was the first defensive player to win the Heisman, and he went on to be the number 4 draft pick, and like if anything exceeded expectations is just honestly incredible. And obviously as a cornerback would never have the same impact on a game as like Peyton Manning a quarterback, but you know, impossible not to argue that he's like a real asset to a team. He was the best player on that defense of that Oakland team that made the Super Bowl, I would say. He was the best player on the Green Bay Super Bowl champions, beat the Steelers. Like he is that kind of player who's capable of being just a real cornerstone. And like I don't fault Randy Moss for the fact that he never won a title because like they had an undefeated team with him. It wasn't like
Right.
He wasn't the one playing defense on the David Tyree catch. It's not his fault really. But yeah, I just always was a fan of Charles Woodson, kind of like uncomplicatedly so. I'm certainly not going to crush the Randy Moss pick that I think probably a lot of people listening would also have him at number 2. I don't think anyone's going to have him above Peyton, but I think that I think that the top 3 are like in some order very, very clear.
Mm-hmm.
I think number 4 is like moderately clear, but I don't think it's as obvious. But I'll let you speak on anything on Charles Woodson you want to say before you make your pick. But...
I mean, yeah, like he was, like you said, he was just the dude. Like, for me, growing up watching any football, for the most part, it was offensive guys that I cared about. It was the jersey I would want or who I would care. But it was like he was kind of the first guy, and then for whatever reason, I like him, and then I also in my younger years gravitated towards the safety Roy Williams for whatever reason, and started to really get an appreciation because, like, I think we get more. You get maybe more today about defensive backs, and they get more credit because, like, oh well, they're not throwing them his way because it's getting locked down. We hear more about the guys, the Sauce Gardners, the L'Jarius Sneed, or other top corners we hear today.
And I think Woodson was kind of the beginning of that trend, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. It would be sort of like him, Champ Bailey, another one early on, probably to do that. But that they sort of brought defensive backs into the forefront. And obviously, as the league would become more pass heavy, I think there would be a bigger emphasis put on the defensive back. So I think with Woodson, definitely started that trend, but not just starting the trend, he was also the top of it, from the get-go, pretty much. It wasn't like, there wasn't much of an acclamation. He came in and was like, I hate this. So.
Yeah, and was kind of just that guy for like 15 years because like a lot of cornerbacks, especially like, once they get to like a decade in the league or so, really slow down and they move to like safety or they become like much spottier players. But he was like a like star level player basically until he was done.
Yeah, for sure. Excuse me. All right. Number 4. The way I saw it as I was making my list out, this is a draft class of 4 Hall of Famers. So why not take the remaining Hall of Famer?
Yeah.
At number 4. That would be the guard and a little bit of tackle, but mostly left guard, Alan Faneca. This is a dude who played from 98 to 2010. And you know how many games he missed in that time?
I can't imagine very many, if any.
2.
Yeah, that's not very many games to miss.
Yeah. And, outside of his first 4 games this first year and 1 game his second year, he started all those. So, but just one of the most dominant guards, like one of the first offensive linemen, maybe outside of Orlando Pace that I remember learning the name of from watching football broadcasts was Alan Faneca.
Announcers loved him.
Like 6-time All-Pro, 6-time Pro or 7-time Pro Bowler. So it's it's. I wish that like Pro Football Focus would have been doing like a lot more of kind of their studies, and there was maybe more, kind of things. Like I think they have like the number of penalties he had. So like in his 24 or in his entire career. So this is, what do we say it was, like 12 years, 12, 13 years. You know how many holding penalties he got called for in the regular season?
Let me know.
4.
I think Fred Miller got called for more than that in one game against the Titans in '99. But that was false starts, but regardless.
Yeah. Only had, I think here, if I'm reading this correctly, it's had 24 false start penalties accepted, and then 5 that were declined or offsetting penalties in his career. So that's like, holy cow. Like, he was beyond elite. And like you said, announcers loved him. And maybe that's part of the reason I knew who he was. I also had a brother who eventually became a high school offensive lineman and stuff. So I was maybe around it a little more. But as we learned with our last football draft, I love to give the shout out to the big boys when I can. So, and it's funny. I actually had Alan Faneca ahead of Charles Woodson, and I had him as number 3.
Wow.
And maybe that was just my big guy bias. And I won't lie, I did this like multiple weeks ago and don't know what my headspace was at the time I did it. But hey, it sounds like we're both pretty happy with who we've ended up with in these first, 5 picks or 4 picks.
This draft is basically like our Chinese democracy. We just kind of kept kicking the can down the road in terms of when we were actually gonna record it, when we were gonna release it, but we got it going. But yeah, actually the main thing I remember Alan Faneca from was how highly rated he was in Madden. Like he was like they had years where they would give guys 100 rather than 99, and he was definitely in the 100 class. And one of the rare like iconic offensive linemen that's primarily not a tackle.
Yeah,
like I feel like it's him and like Larry Allen are kind of the two from. I guess he's a little bit later than Larry Allen, but same general era.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
It was kind of a rarity.
He's no Richie Incognito, but who is?
He sure isn't. But yeah, Faneca, despite my exhibited bias against drafting offensive linemen, was my number 4. So no arguments from me there. My pick, I'm going to draft the other guy from this draft class who was a multiple-time first-team All-AP Pro. As I said, draft class rather than draft because I'm venturing into the territory of the undrafted player. I am going with legendary Indianapolis Colts head coach Jeff Saturday. He is not a Hall of Famer, but I think you can make a real case for it based on just how well regarded he was throughout his career. 3-time All-Pro, 2 times first team, like I said. 6-time Pro Bowler. Was actually 3rd in this draft class by weighted approximate value, which I think is a pretty good barometer in terms of overall production. He was actually ahead of my last pick, Charles Woodson. But it was a really vital part of the Indianapolis Colts. You wouldn't call it a dynasty because they only won the one title, but a big part of the Indianapolis Colts, being if not quite Patriots level, like the other great team of that era. And, like we've established, we're not actually drafting coherent teams here, but following up Peyton Manning a couple rounds later with Jeff Saturday feels like it's
that's apropos.
Feels like there's something poetic there. And as far as I can tell, also Jeff Saturday, just like a beloved teammate, people love the guy. Like I remember, I know a few people who are Colts fans who were like bummed when he got the head coaching job because they were like, I know I'm not going to like him as a head coach. I know this isn't going to go well, and I don't want to have to root against Jeff Saturday, but I know I'm going to.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I'm excited just in general. First of all, that you're going to give some love to the big boys too. It's not just me.
Right.
Yeah, and like you said, I think there's something apropos with you going and having him with Peyton Manning. I think what you said hits nail on the head. I mean, he's essentially, I guess, in terms of like popularity and all that kind of stuff, maybe like was the he was Jason Kelsey before Jason Kelsey, if you will, in terms of
that's a good comparison.
Which Jason, I know you're a big fan of the show. Congrats, enjoy retirement, man. But he
one podcast or another.
Yes, from only you do yours with your brother, and mine's my brother from another mother. But I think Saturday's a great pick. He was, in an era where, again, like you said, most people talk about tackles, but a center literally involved on every single offensive play, like,
true.
Directly involved. I guess I should say, not that blocking's not directly involved, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So my next pick, I am going to take a guy who, well, yes, no all-pro teams, 4-time Pro Bowler, 2-time Super Bowl champion. And in one of those Super Bowls, he was an MVP. I'm going to take Hines Edward Ward Jr., a wide receiver. Obviously, maybe I'm just going with guys. Third round pick. First of all, if we're talking value for what you got out of Hines Ward, drafted 92nd overall in this draft.
Yeah, and I think it was probably because he was a late convert to receiver because he played quarterback for at least a year or two at Georgia.
Yeah, and one of those rare experiments, and just maybe Pittsburgh just loved kind of going that route with his conversion. Antoine Randall L, obviously.
Cordell Stewart before that. I mean, you had just a lot of those, but I mean, a guy who had 1,000 receptions in his career, over 12,000 yards, I believe. Yeah, 12,083 yards. And you get a Super Bowl MVP to your name. I think you can make an argument about coming up in clutch, and anybody who watched Hines Ward play, like, in stark contrast to Randy Moss, like, Hines Ward is as tall as I am. He's 6'0" nothing. Not the biggest guy, and good speed, but I wouldn't say elite speed from him. But Duke could run a route, like, yeah,
and if you threw it to him, if it hit him in the hands, he was going to catch it. A guy who just, like I said, was on obviously some really good teams, but had between 2001 and 2004 went over 1,000 yards every year. Then kind of had that late career resurgence in 08, 09, where he had some of his better years. But then, at the same time too, I think there's always something to be said for this. Like, Jude played his entire career in Pittsburgh. Like, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and he was very consistent player, and I know you mentioned a little bit of a drop off, kind of like towards the end, but
he was one of the guys I was surprised to hear wasn't in the Hall of Fame. But I know that the Pro Football Hall of Fame is very weird with wide receivers.
Yes, they are. It's that's why Torrey Holt's not in, which is,
I don't want to talk about that. Like,
well, I was just thinking whenever you'd mentioned with Randy Moss and that game against the Rams in the playoffs that there's 3 Hall of Fame wide receivers from that game, and Torrey Holt's not one of them.
Not one of them, because Bruce, Carter, and Moss.
Which, to be fair, Bruce, Carter, and Moss also are all deserving Hall of Famers, but
Torrey Holt will never get talked about the way he needs to be. We need to do his redraft sometime so we can just sing the praises of Torrey Holt. I mean, it's just the next year, I guess, isn't it?
It
He
is
was
the
the
next year, yeah.
I remember. Fun fact was, I remember being so mad the Rams couldn't draft Champ Bailey, and then he was taking the pick before Torrey Holt, I think, or was he taking the pick?
It was one of the two. Yeah, I don't remember offhand.
So I remember being mad that we didn't have Champ Bailey. Which, to be fair, like Torrey Holt was fantastic. Champ Bailey would have also been good. Like, to be fair,
yeah. I'm happy they took Holt, but if they had taken Bailey, I'd have been happy that they had Bailey too. Can't get too mad either way.
Nah, but I mean, Ward, just solid workhorse, good receiver, and sticking with this theme of, you don't want to conjecture too much, but genuinely just seemed like a good dude, like, good teammate.
I believe he might be the greatest NFL player of all time born in Asia.
He is, right? South Korea, I believe, is where he was born.
South Korean, yep.
So, I mean, it's hard to argue with him, and I'm happy to take him at 6. So,
with the number 7 pick, I am going to, for the second consecutive pick, draft an undrafted player.
Undrafted again.
Out of John Carroll University, signed by the St. Louis Rams. A young named London Fletcher. London Fletcher, I actually had above Hines Ward on my list, which might be just biased because he was one of my favorite players when he was on the Rams. He had a long, productive run throughout his career. 4-time Pro Bowler, 2-time second team All-Pro. Just like a real linchpin kind of player, and even though he was only in his second year, like he was the best linebacker on that Rams Super Bowl winning team, and I think it really says something about London Fletcher that. So in '99, the Rams won the Super Bowl, and they had the number 6, I think, rated defense. It was a really highly rated defense, like really great score defense. Like they scored a bunch of touchdowns on their own. 2000, one of the worst defenses in the history of the NFL. They overhauled almost the entire thing. And London Fletcher, one of the very few players that brought back the next year. And I think that says a lot about how respected he was. And the only reason he left the Rams was just because of like kind of cap casualty. He became a free agent, ended up signing with, I believe it was in Buffalo after that. Mm-hmm. And eventually went on to Washington and has had a really productive career. I don't know if he'll ever make the Hall of Fame. I think that he absolutely merits consideration for it. But I think that, a guy that was never a first-team All-Pro probably is going to take him a little bit of time to kind of build up that cachet. But, another one of those guys that seems to have a lot of respect among, like, NFL analysts. Like, he seems like the kind of guy that, like, the Fox NFL Sunday crew would just have a lot of respect for this guy. And part of it's probably just because he did kind of come out of nowhere. He, Jeff Saturday was undrafted, but he at least played at North Carolina, which is, not the biggest program, but it's still in the ACC. You get a guy out of John Carroll who turns that around, and in his second season is one of the 2 or 3 best defensive players on a Super Bowl champion. That, speaks a lot to the kind of next level he was able to get to once he made it to the pros.
Yeah, and I think, obviously playing in a small school, and, for his position, he was an undersized guy. Like, he was small.
Yeah, he was.
He was a little guy, but
I suspect that's why he didn't get much attention, because like he was fast and he was talented, but
and I think it's he's one of those guys where probably had a bigger light on him, living in St. Louis and being a fan. Like, every single Rams fan loved the heck out of London Fletcher, like just because he was in a sense on a team that had a lot of, I don't know, I guess bigger name superstars on that defense that you were talking about. Like, he was certainly one of the best on it, but he wasn't going to get the fanfare that, like you said, Wistrom or Kevin Carter or DeMarco Farr were getting with, the line or, whoever, Todd Light on the back end or whatever. But I think is anybody who knows NFL or football defense will tell you, like, if you don't have a general in the middle of that defense that's kind of outlining stuff and can diagnose plays and be that step up behind the line, and he was just a guy who just went about his business and was really, really good at it.
He was our undersized general, much like Napoleon. I'm sure Napoleon would appreciate being compared to a guy named London, but
yeah, R.I.P. Napoleon for not winning any Academy Awards.
But you were saying R.I.P. to Napoleon, like the guy. I was like, I guess, yeah, sure.
I know. I was going
deceased,
with
that's true.
I was going with the Ridley Scott film of the same name. But yes, I love that. Love that pick.
All right, you are up.
All right, I am up next. Well, I feel like after that pick, I'm losing. So, John, I want the ball, and I'm gonna score.
Wow. All right.
I'm gonna take Matt Hasselbeck here. Now, part of it is I feel like as I looked at kind of my rankings here, I think part of the thing in here is obviously value. You get a guy who had any sort of career as a, I don't know, any good quarterbacks ever get drafted in the 6th round that you've ever heard about, John? I don't know if it's ever happened before.
I believe he's the only one.
Yeah.
Mark Bulger was 6th round. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. More West Virginia stuff. Anyway.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, for as much flack as Hasselbeck will forever get because we want the ball and we're going to score, and Al Harris picking him off in that playoff game, which, to be fair, is one of the greatest just like moments ever to like witness. The guy still had a good career. Over 36,000 passing yards. And I think in an age where if you can get a guy who has a lengthy career as a starting quarterback, like, I won't pretend to think that in a redraft that's not important. Like we see it in the NFL where guys will maybe get extended for because they're quarterbacks. I think, there is that argument to be made. Obviously, kept the pipeline from Boston College, I think is where he went to school, if I remember.
Yeah.
Following in the little footsteps of Doug Flutie. Obviously was drafted by Green Bay, but probably most people remember as a quarterback for Seattle.
Went to a Super Bowl with them.
Tennessee and Indianapolis at the end of that. But, went to a Super Bowl, 3-time Pro Bowler. A guy that I obviously watched play a lot as Seattle's quarterback because they played the Rams a lot. But, I don't know, like, his numbers, like, if you're comparing him to, like, a Peyton Manning, but I think by far the second best quarterback in this draft.
Yeah, he was, I think, the only other quarterback in my. There is a big drop off after him. Just honestly, a bigger drop off from him to the next quarterback than there is between him and Peyton. Yeah. It's a little bit hard to know where to evaluate a guy like Matt Hasselbeck because he's the first guy we've drafted so far that not an All-Pro. He was 3-time Pro Bowler, which is good, but it's not premium amounts. But like we said, he was a starting quarterback for a team that made the Super Bowl, and he was not a game manager. Like, he was legitimately a big part of why they got there.
The Seahawks did not have a defense like the historically the Bears or the Ravens teams that were making Super Bowls,
or like the Seattle teams from not that much later.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah, I think that I think Hasselbeck was probably the better quarterback in that Super Bowl. Like, besides just that game, because Ben Roethlisberger famous had a really bad game, and why Hines Ward got the MVP. Yeah. But I think at that stage in his career, like, Matt Hasselbeck winning a Super Bowl would not have been it wouldn't have been like a standout. Oh, that's kind of weird. Like, I think even ahead of Flacco, like, he's probably the closest comp.
He is elite. Joe Flacco is elite.
That's true. I'm bummed that Joe Flacco wasn't able to make a deeper playoff run this year. So you get Joe Flacco Hall of Fame discourse because, frankly, I think he has a better case than Eli Manning. But
Yeah, you know, that's
a whole different
gonna say.
argument we can.
Come at him,
That's
folks. Come at him.
opening up a whole can of worms there. Good pick though. So my next pick, kind of venturing. I think that there's a little bit of a drop off now. Or we're still getting guys who are really good, but they're not necessarily like generational star level players anymore.
Yeah.
I am going to take a guy who was drafted out of Georgia Tech, did not have to move far once he got drafted. That would be the number 12 overall pick, Keith Brooking. Just a really solid, strong linebacker for the Falcons for quite a while. Two-time AP number 2, second team, I should say. I believe second in this draft in terms of total number of career tackles, a distant second behind London Fletcher, but just a really solid kind of player. Probably not somebody that I would want as the the key guy on my defense, but I think that a team could have easily won a Super Bowl with him being the number 1.5 linebacker on the team, for instance. And I think that those the early Michael Vick years where Michael Vick was kind of taking care of the entire offense and just kind of raising them to a level of competence. I think if the Falcons defense had a couple more players like Keith Brooking, they would have been able to be much more legitimate Super Bowl contenders than they actually were.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we're seeing a theme with the type of guys that you definitely like here, John. Keith Brooking and London Fletcher, I'd say they had a very similar style of play. To all of that, in the sense of, they were hard nosed, lay it all out there kind of guys that just, make good plays. So, it's hard to argue with that pick. And like you said, well, there's a drop off. Yeah, I think, he's a guy too. I mean, if, maybe if a thing or two had gone differently, he could, be sitting there with a Super Bowl ring or two with some of those teams.
Yeah.
So John, I like where you went with that linebacker pick. I'm going to stay in the linebacker pick. I'm going to go with Takeo Spikes as my next pick.
A+ name.
Yes, a great name, a great nickname, a TKO. I mean, kind of sitting right there, easy for the picking. But a one-time All-Pro, 2-time Pro Bowler, a guy that I honestly don't remember too much earlier in his career. And to be fair, he came out and his rookie year in '98 had 95 solo tackles and 17 assisted tackles. So it's not like he wasn't contributing right away, kind of a thing. But yeah, I started to.
I was gonna say, I remember him pretty early in his career, and he was not a super fast guy, but he fly. He was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. And from what I remember, when he hit dudes, he hit dudes. His first 2 years in Buffalo were his, best ones probably. A guy for a linebacker too. I mean, 19 career interceptions. It's not nothing for a linebacker. And 3 of those turned into touchdowns. Forced 16 fumbles in his career. 79 tackles for loss. Dudes, was good. And then even had a little bit of had a role to play at the end of his career. And some, with San Francisco, San Diego, had a stop for a year in Philadelphia in 2007. But consistency, a guy who, over 100 tackles in 2010, 2011 is second and third to last season. So it's not he wasn't productive. Really the thing that kind of just shot him in Buffalo a little bit was the injury bug. Obviously only played 3 games in 2005, 12 and 2006. And I think that's what kind of, had he stayed healthy, may have, been even better of a player. But still a really, really good linebacker and a guy that I just remember watching being like, oh, dang, I want to play with this dude. Or, I want this dude on my team, kind of a thing from the defensive side.
Yeah. Yeah, hard not to like a guy who has an entire subsection of his Wikipedia page called neck, about how his neck measured at 21 inches and how he could bench 490 pounds, which is completely psychotic, but
I mean, I
I
could do
believe it.
that.
You just don't want to. Yeah.
You know, that sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, you got a lot going on. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, good pick. Don't have really a whole lot to add to that besides the fact that I think he was like a more fun player to watch than Keith Brooking, maybe even a more fun player to watch than London Fletcher if I'm kind of removing my own bias from it, but it probably didn't have quite as long of a run of being like a superstar, but yeah, it definitely had a high peak, so I'm not gonna argue too much there. So for my next pick, I'm gonna go to a guy who, much like Ryan Fitzpatrick after him, went to Harvard, and that is the first thing that anyone ever says about him and will ever say about him. They've made an entire like United Way, I think it was, commercial about it during his prime. That would be Matt Burke, the center out of the Minnesota Vikings, six-time Pro Bowler. The whole saying he's smart because he went to Harvard thing is obviously way overplayed, but he was a big part of their team for some really good years. I think that with the Vikings, there's a tendency to kind of look at them like not making, say, the Super Bowl with him and kind of devaluing that. But they were a consistently really good team and specifically consistently really good offense. It's kind of like a poor man's version of Jeff Saturday in terms of like what he accomplished in his career, and was just a really you know steady, good player for quite a while. And did I mention that he went to Harvard?
What? Like it's hard?
Oh, movie references.
I say, for anyone who doesn't understand, I just dropped a Legally Blonde reference into this podcast. So
You couldn't
count it.
couldn't squeeze it in on the actual movie podcast we did recently, so I'm glad you're able to get in where you could.
Yeah, that one, we're really, really, really crunched for time on that one, so I didn't want to force anything in.
Fair enough.
I mean, but yeah, I mean, what you said, I mean, uh, a staple, again, at the center position for a long time for a team who, I don't know, there's not a ton else to say that it's funny. I mean, I have a friend whose name is also Matt Burke, only he spells it the more traditional way. But so when I saw that, I got a chuckle out of that. Other than that, shout out to Matt Burke if you're listening. But say you're going over the big boys this time, then I'm gonna go. I'm just gonna keep taking flashy skill players. Actually, not flashy, but a guy who may have some controversy, but taken high in this draft, taken the first round. But I'm gonna take a running back. I'm gonna take Fred Taylor.
I would argue a guy that was not flashy, but like in the best possible way, because
Yeah,
that guy could
he was
just
just like
bowl guys over.
he went about his business, and so this is a funny thing. I had a period of my life where, when I was younger, I was a Jacksonville Jaguars fan, and the reason was, and I don't know why my dad did this. My dad went on a business trip to Atlanta. He brought my brother back an Atlanta Braves hat. Makes sense. He brought me back a Jacksonville Jaguars coat.
Sure, yeah.
So,
Nothing says a
but
trip to the deep southeast like a coat of any kind, much
yeah,
less.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it's neither here nor there. The next time we went to Atlanta, I got a San Jose Sharks. So hey, at least we were geographically closer this time. Um, love you, Dad. Anyway, but Fred Taylor was a dude who, like, when I was watching them too, just like when you had Mark Brunell, Jimmy Smith, and Fred Taylor, that offense was fun
Yeah,
to
Nick
watch.
Keenan McCardle was also a lot of fun around that time.
Yeah, I mean, like, but Fred Taylor, dude, over 11, I think almost 12,000 rushing yards, 695. Wasn't a great receiver, only had 2,400 receiving yards in his career, but in a day and age where we see how running backs are now, how they're treated. Obviously, in the free agency, we just saw a lot of movement with running backs on the first day of free agency in the NFL. But I mean, a dude who played 12 years straight, did have some injury bugs towards the end.
That's the big problem, I think, with him is his.
And then the 01 season, obviously huge. He only played 2 games. Got knocked out for the year, but did make one Pro Bowl. That was really surprised me. It's like one Pro Bowl, no first or second team All Pros. Like it was, finished 5th in the comeback player of the year in 02, but in 3rd at offensive rookie of the year voting.
Yeah, I feel like Fred Taylor, like obviously, like we're doing an audio only like podcast. So obviously, we're gonna have to bring up the stats, but he really is you kind of had to see it to really understand what it's about. And
wasn't a big dude, like wasn't huge. I mean, he's what 6'1", 220, probably somewhere thereabouts. But
yeah, so he's the 12th pick in this draft. He was actually number 12 on my board, and I like statistically can't even justify him being that high, but also like I get it. He is like he had that ability to kind of run like there really isn't a comparable player in today's NFL. Like the closest I could think of, and because you mentioned first day free agency, like Derrick Henry's the only thing I can think of in terms of guys that just like run guys over, and like I think Derrick Henry is like a more effective player than Fred Taylor was at his peak.
Yeah.
But I mean, Fred Taylor was that kind of player, and the Jaguars were like kind of just like a cool team at that point because they were new. They didn't have a lot of history to them, and when you're, the ages that we were at that time, being kind of the new kid on the block is cool. It is fun, and like I had no thoughts on like Jacksonville as a city or like Tom Coughlin or whatever. It just that didn't matter. It was just like, hey, there's this cool guy that's like really good and fun and exciting. So I like the pick.
Yeah.
And he probably wouldn't fit in today's NFL, but we're not necessarily drafting this for right now. We're drafting this for down the line.
Yeah, I mean it's how he was, and what he, the stats are there, and the advanced stats actually like him quite a bit as well. So.
Yeah. All right. For my number 7 pick, I am going to draft my 3rd center of the.
No, I was hoping to get this guy later. Dang it. He's my favorite of the 3 centers.
So this is a guy that I mostly associate with constantly being on the cover of Madden in Mexico and other like Spanish speaking markets because he was like there weren't that many great Hispanic players, I guess, in the NFL at that particular time. Olin Kreutz was drafted by the Chicago Bears. Unlike Matt Burke, he had a first team All-Pro in there. Didn't have as long of a career as the other centers, but was a really like top of the line player for a little while for the Bears. The Bears basically during our lifetimes have never had a particularly potent offense, and I think in this case, while you can give credit to Saturday and Burke for the accomplishments of their offenses, you also would agree with Olin Kreutz that he was not the reason those Bears teams were struggling. To the extent that they had good offenses around that time, it was like up the middle runners. It was guys like Anthony Thomas, for instance, during his like brief run, and having a really good center who's able to kind of get protection in there. And it wasn't the Bears were ever losing because their like quarterbacks didn't have enough time to throw the ball or anything like that. It was just because they couldn't throw the football very well because they weren't very good. So
yeah. No, I was hoping I could get him.
I learned from last time. I'm just going all offensive linemen now.
I'm gonna say it. It's like, man, how the tables have turned. But no,
I drafted one skill position player the entire time,
and it's the best player in the draft by far. So,
well, yeah,
but I just need to get better at game pigeon pool. That's really what the lesson here is. For the record, we play other times, and I do beat John sometimes. It's not like he wins every time.
Sometimes.
He wins more than I do, but it's, it's fine. But yeah, no, all recruits. The funny thing too, it's like, for all the things too, for him being, Spanish speaking, very good, big influence and stuff. Like, if you just saw his name, you wouldn't be like, oh yeah, he's a big star down in Mexico. Like, you're like, oh, he's German. Like was
Sure.
like just the way it's spelled and stuff like it. The Americanized version of the Kreutz is probably like Kreutz is probably the actual original pronunciation stuff. But yeah, just another good solid workhorse center. Which shame he didn't have better
Good draft
quarterbacks.
of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then I guess I'm gonna stay true to me. I'm going to go offensive line now. I'll take the more traditional. I'll go to the tackle position. But in the second round, the Dallas Cowboys selected Flozell Adams.
Back to the awesome names.
Yes, I mean, the best part is too. Do you know what Flozell Adams' middle name is? Did you see this on PFR?
I did not know.
It is Flozell Jootin, Jootin Adams.
What?
Like,
Okay.
come on, like that's so baller. But I mean, a workhorse who actually played guard his first year, which is funny. He's a right guard his first year, and then switched to left tackle and just became a beast. 5-time Pro Bowler. It's hard. When you think about it, it's like I struggled for a while. It's like, yeah, he was never a first team All Pro type thing, but to be that when you're a left tackle, you kind of have to be.
You're kind of going against some premium.
Yeah, you think about like the run Orlando
alternatives.
Pace was on in that time. You think about the run, other guys. It's not like I don't hold that against him. I mean, and obviously with most quarterbacks being right-handed, the left tackle is the blind, that blind side thing was, always like that was kind of the more highly touted guys. Unless you were the Falcons, and your right tackle, I guess, was more important with Mike Vick, but he'd just outrun the guys anyway, at least in Madden 04. Sure. But, just solid. Another guy who just, again, in that time period for me as a kid, like if I knew who you were as an offensive lineman, and admittedly, I followed Dallas, throughout early stages of my life, even though I was following the Rams. I had a youth pastor whose dad was actually the chaplain for the Cowboys. So, like,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so, like, shout out to Tim. Love you, buddy.
Guessing he wasn't privy to like the top like Michael Irvin and like Nate Newton stories and.
Yeah, I didn't ask him a whole lot about it. I more asked him about the guys that talked to his dad, maybe more that were involved in the services.
There,
stuff like that. But he's my youth pastor. There were plenty of other things to talk about with him. But at the end of it, guys, played with Dallas his entire career except for his last year. He played a year in Pittsburgh, where he's a right tackle, but started all 16 games still. So,
yep.
Recovered 10 fumbles in his career too. There's a fun little fact for you. But
nice.
I think we're getting to that point where it's not going to be a ton of things, especially these offensive linemen without stats. But the dude's
especially
good.
In this era, it doesn't have necessarily like the Pro Football Focus kind of.
Exactly,
stats,
which I love to look at that for offensive linemen, as we saw in our first NFL one. But
yeah, maybe that's why I'm the one drafting offensive linemen now, is I don't know anything about that, so I'm just kind of guessing. But all right, number 8 pick for me, I'm going to go with Jeremiah Trotter, linebacker of the Philadelphia Eagles. Was a first-team All-Pro for a year, which is pretty cool. Also was a second-team one time, 4-time Pro Bowler. Just kind of was one of those guys who, like, during his prime was just a real fixture for that Eagles defense. And, that was an Eagles team that, even though They kind of infamously took a long time to get over the hump. They were really good every year, and he was a big part of the reason why. And eventually moved on. I actually had forgotten that he had spent 2 years in Washington in between kind of Eagles runs, but he was back for the time they actually made it to the Super Bowl. Even had a year in Tampa Bay, which I completely forgot about, but or possibly didn't know. Didn't have as long of a career as you might like. He only played until he was 32, which NFL a physical sport, so
Sure.
it kind of just is what it is. But really solid, kind of strong player. His son is, I don't remember if he's not in the NFL, but he was a second team All American with Clemson.
Hmm.
So that was cool. But yeah, Jeremiah Trotter, just a good player. He was, and at this point in the draft, you're looking at the number like 15 overall pick. If you can get a guy who's capable of being like an All Pro type player at linebacker, go for it.
Yeah. No, I think it's not a lot to add, but a solid pick of your team of centers and linebackers. And
I will
Peyton.
say I do have the number of skill position players I have on the rest of my list is not zero, but looking at it, there wasn't a lot of them to go with.
Yeah.
You've gotten the
Nice.
ones I had.
Yeah. It's I like where you went, and I can my next pick can actually kind of build off one of the things you're talking about. Somebody who has a son. Well, the guy I'm going to pick does have a son who's actively playing in the NFL,
I know. Yeah,
and I'm
and
going
he's
to
awesome.
go. And his son has a shot to be better than he was, but I'm going to go with one-time All-Pro Patrick Surtain or Surtain, however you say. I think it's Surtain. Is how I've always heard
I
it.
believe it is. I believe it is Sertan.
His son of the same name, Patrick Surtain II. Very good corner, I think, out in Denver. But this is a guy, like I said, one-time All-Pro, 3-time Pro Bowler, 37 career interceptions, 26 career tackles for loss. Like, just solid. And I think he's also a second team All-Pro 1 year as well. So I mean, you're getting a guy who's on 2 All-Pro teams at 16. A guy who, Miami, um, you know, started his career, ended it with Kansas City. Um, you know, much like John's last pick, also only played till he was 32. But just again in this era where passing was becoming, the evolution of the game became much more passing. In the early 2000s that we were used to seeing. I mean, this is a dude who, you could stick out on the corner and he was, probably more times than not going to make the play on his receiver. So that's kind of where I went with it. I think there's a lot of guys when you get to this point in the draft that you can start to make arguments for just, like we said over and over, 16th in the draft. It's, it's hard to ask for anything more than what he gave you.
Yeah, solid pick. Number 17, I am going to go with somebody. So you earlier went with Matt Hasselbeck, who was drafted by Green Bay and became what he became really in Seattle. And I'm going with the inverse.
He's going to take a skill
player who's
position guy.
drafted by Seattle, became what he became in Green Bay. He's the all-time leading rusher for the Green Bay Packers. It is Amon Green. He also retired at 32, but he was a running back, so that's a little bit more expected. But yeah, he was just a really good, really just like a quick, all-around solid running back. He had like a little bit of pass catching ability. He was a first-team All-Pro in 2003. It's really weird to me that he was not more highly coveted coming out. He was a third-round draft pick, considering he was starting running back on 2 national championship winning teams in college, including as a freshman on the 95 Nebraska team that is like maybe the greatest team of all time whenever Lawrence Phillips got kicked off the team for most of the year. And yet he was the one that got drafted super high. Not that I'm mad about that at all. Let's vow to never do the 1996 NFL draft because I'm going to have some thoughts. But yeah, Amon Green is the one that, became, not like an absolute superstar in the NFL, but yeah, I think pretty clearly he and Fred Taylor are the two best running backs from this class, and he was number 16 on my board. Patrick Surtain was number 17 on my board, which means that all 17 picks so far are my top 17 guys. So I feel like maybe our picks are not that unique or interesting. Maybe that's what it says.
I don't know.
But look, this is what happens when we go back to sports drafts. We're going to go a little bit more conventional because there's actually like stats.
Yeah,
there weren't numbers to back up like the gooey butter cake pick on the St. Louis draft.
good pick though. Good pick. But yeah, I'm on Green. Like I remember being like, when I used to play the Madden games growing up a lot, I loved to do when I would do like franchise mode. I always fantasy drafted, and he was a guy that for whatever reason I never like placed super high. Like early pick on a running back, and I ended up with Amon Green a lot. And then would always end up with like Trump candidate as my backup running back because I would just go to who has like the highest speed, and he was like
a
99.
I say Trump candidate was a good Madden player for the same reason that Amon Green was a great Madden player, which is you just get quick guys and you're gonna be good.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I mean, he was as solid as they come. I mean, I think anybody when you can get that type of thing or that type of player, hard to not go with it. So,
all right, number 18, you are up.
Number 18. All right. Gonna go. Hate that I'm taking Dallas guys so stinking much, but I'm gonna take a man with 84 career sacks and the 2007 Comeback Player of the Year. Defensive
the
end,
biggest award of them all.
Greg Ellis.
Yeah, that's a good choice.
I mean, in an age where sacks, became huge. I mean, when he's Comeback Player of the Year, he actually had his best career season after, he also won Comeback Player of the Year. He won it in 07 in the year where he only played 13 games. Like, I know that's a majority of them. But he's also coming off a year where he played 9 games, so he played half the year.
Football's so hard, man.
Yeah, like, and it's nothing to say. Like, I won't lie. I didn't do the research to see, like, what his injury was. It could have been a really bad injury. I don't know. And he literally, maybe couldn't come back and start playing and get medically cleared until week 4. I don't know. But, at the end of the day, this is dude who can just get to the quarterback. Like I said, 84 career sacks over an 11-year career or 12-year career, 11 years of Dallas. And why do guys just always seem to like when they need a random year to like end their career, they end up in Oakland? But he was another one of those guys. But I mean, to be fair, like even in his final years, a 34-year-old defensive end, he had 7 sacks. So it's like he was still contributing up to the end. When he kind of came back with Dallas, he had switched from kind of your traditional down lineman defensive end to more of like the outside linebacking edge rusher kind of thing, which would obviously we know now that literally guys in the NFL draft or have the position of just edge is literally like a designation now.
Yeah. Which I don't like. I'm rigidly old school and feel weird about that.
Yeah, I think it's in a way, to me, it demeans the talent and skill set of some of the guys, if I'm being completely honest. Just
it seems like baby talk to me. Like the same part of me that gets angry whenever in hockey it's referred to as a celly. The same part of my brain that hates calling it an edge. It's like, come on, guys, grow up. We have a thing that we call it already. It's fine.
Yeah, and it's the name Edge has already been taken by a WWE superstar who's now at AEW going by his name, Adam Copeland. Anyway, this is not a wrestling podcast because
I was going to go with Edgerrin James.
I mean,
On U2 also.
Yeah, I mean, we can go a lot of ways with it, but I digress. Greg Ellis, good edge rusher, just to make John mad. Yeah, just solid guy. Had a decent career. Only a few, really only that one season of injuries. Other than that, played at least 13 games in every other season, and even the one where he didn't, it was 9. So 176 games over his career. Kind of, good for him.
I had him at number 19, so we're on similar pages here. For my number 19 pick, I guess I got to go with the guy I had at 18 just to keep my board as chalky as possible. This is somebody who, kind of similar to the Flozell Adams thing, where he has 1 team All Pro, 3 Pro Bowls. Technically, I guess is falling a little bit because he was a number 11 pick in the actual draft. Going with Trey Thomas, the offensive tackle out of the Philadelphia Eagles, out of Florida State. I think I've lost all of my. Maybe this is why I didn't really draft a lot of offensive linemen last time, is I don't really have that many descriptors for them. But I have what is tangible. But he was number 18 on my board. I'm honestly rooting for you to draft the guy that I had at 20 just so we can go fully chalk, but we'll see.
Yeah, nah, Trey Thomas, believe it or not, number 19 on my board. So
nice. Do we have the same top 19 then, or is there some differentiation there?
Yeah, in some way, shape, or form, yeah, we have the same top 19. Obviously,
then.
So, yeah. So, and the funny thing is I have like 4 or 5 guys listed at 20 because it's, do I want to go with who I think the real best player is, or do I want to give shout out? Kind of a thing.
I mean, we can still shout out guys afterwards.
Yeah.
But
So if I'm gonna go with it, I think the guy I'm gonna go with. You know what? Let's do it. Shouting out. It's been a lot of emphasis on defensive backs. I'm gonna go Samari Roll.
Ooh, okay.
You know, a guy who
College teammate of Trey Thomas.
Yeah. Was another defensive back guy. We're talking, maybe not as prolific as some of these other guys, but does have a first team and a Pro Bowl selection to his name. Those were both in the year 2000. And obviously saw him a lot in, the Super Bowl in 2000 between the Rams and Titans.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but I do not believe that he was the guy who was he the guy that was singled on Isaac Bruce on the touchdown?
I think he might have been. I'm not 100% sure of that, though.
Yeah. But, but a guy overall who, keep in mind, though, he was like essentially, he's a second-year corner at that point. But, 31 career interceptions. He was just a solid guy, and between Tennessee and then Baltimore in his later years, still, was a guy starting up until his last year or two. So I don't know. Maybe I just got defensive back happy. He was one of a myriad of names that I had.
Yeah, so the next 3 so my number 20, 21, and 22, and once I got past 20, I wasn't really worrying myself too much with it, but they were all former Rams, so.
Hey, that's funny. Because, I think the other 4 names I have here are all former Rams.
So I had Leonard Little at 20. He had much shorter peak, but was really good for a while. Kyle Turley, I had at 21. He had a first team All-Pro in there. And then Grant Wistrom, who we mentioned earlier, who, number 6 overall pick, I do not view a bust whatsoever, but still obviously fell relative to this really strong draft.
Yeah. It's funny. I had all those guys. And then as another one, which was not a serious contender, if you will. But I have Oz Hakeem on there too.
I figured you might. There were guys who were down here on the list that were not like serious contenders. I still think of as being really good players. Like Mike Vanderjack's legacy is based on Peyton Manning being an idiot kicker during the Pro Bowl, but he was still awesome. Phil Dawson, like
Yeah.
one of the best
Okay.
kickers, honestly, of all time. If you look at his resume,
Yeah.
guys like Brian Simmons, Kylie Wong, guys who didn't necessarily have like long careers, but were really solid players for a while. Corey Chavis was quite good for quite some time. And yet, yeah, like I said, this is a good draft.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those where you look at a lot of the guys. I mean, even a guy like third quarterback with Brian Greasy, I think was in this draft.
Yeah, Greasy was the only other quarterback that I had at all on my list, which
Yeah. He was down a little bit for me, but like
there's not
again,
a lot of
guy.
well, like Oz Hakeem was my number 3 rated receiver behind
Yeah.
Moss and Ward, and like the fact that Kevin Dyson went ahead of Randy Moss is like obviously crazy and was obviously crazy then. And like Kevin Dyson was okay, and obviously we mostly remember him for getting tackled by Mike Jones, but he was like a solid player, but he was not Randy Moss.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me that Randy Moss, to be fair, that 20 players were drafted ahead of him to begin with. But but like we were talking about, a lot of those, hit in different ways. I also thought about when we were talking about me having kind of the great team name. I thought about going with R.W. McWhorters just because it's a
That is a
fantastic
strong
name.
one.
And to be fair, he had a few years where he was really, really good. But
Yeah, he would not have been an outlandish pick.
But thought the other guys kind of maybe rose, and I don't want to harp on anything, but like I'll be honest, like Little was in that spot there, but um, off the field reasons, one of the reasons I didn't want to. It's a hard thing because I loved him as a player, but
yeah, being from Oakville, heard a lot about that growing up.
Yeah, well, and it's the second one after what happened with the first one is what gets me more, if I'm being completely honest. But I don't want to harp on that. Leonard Little on the field was a very, very, very good football player. But
he was, and
Kyle Turley, like you said him, he's another guy I have like a guy that as good of a offensive lineman as he was will forever be remembered as the guy that chucked the helmet when he was with New Orleans. Like for better or for worse.
I remember that being a huge story the next day on ESPN, and it was the same day as Game 7 of the 2001 World Series, which is like an all-time World Series game. And like it was such a big deal that it was like it wasn't the lead story, but it was like not too far off.
Yeah, it's like, sorry, we'll go back to Luis Gonzalez here in a minute, but
and it turned out that of between those two players, only one of them was demonstrably on steroids, and not the long-haired, muscle-bound guy. I mean, he's been open about being on other substances, but not steroids. I don't believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, which to be fair, like my initial reaction, admittedly, obviously, it was an 11-year-old kid or 10-year-old kid at the time when I saw it. I guess I've been 11, but like the whole Kyle Turley thing to me, I'm like, just being a good teammate. Like, is it a little crazy to do? Sure, but
I was so psyched when the Rams got him. When the Rams got him, I was very excited.
Yeah,
and kind of mixed results once he actually arrived. But
I wish the excitement would have turned into maybe a better time there. But these are all guys that this is the thing. It's like, keep in mind, like we're two guys that can sit here and play armchair quarterback. So it's like we're not professional athletes. We're about the furthest thing from it.
If you say so, yeah.
It's okay. I'll speak for myself.
I got more on why we're not.
I got winded kicking a soccer ball with my kid today.
For more on why we're not professional athletes, be sure to listen to our previous episode about St. Louis things and listen to all the food and drink that we selected.
It, St. Louis, underrated food town, guys. Just
Yeah.
plug to the prior episode.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah, I mean,
we
fun
should probably
draft
wrap this up
class.
before we should probably wrap this up. We start getting too far into talking about food again. But yeah, this was a draft class that has two of the great skill position players of all time. Another exceptional one in Heinz Ward, and then drops off. I had Michael Pittman was the other skill player on my board, and he was not a real contender to be drafted, but yeah. Um, yeah, let's go ahead and call it a night. I am currently watching Mizzou blow a lead in the SEC tournament, which is
Wait, they
what
had a
sports
lead?
are all about. They did. There's a
Man.
minute 30 left in the game, so let's get this wrapped up so you can check out the end of it.
Oh, man.
Where can people find you, though?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at Draft Day Dad Shaw. You can find the podcast at Draft Day Pod.
You can find me at JohnJF125 on the socials. And yeah, that's pretty much that. And we're back in the we're back into sports drafts. Obviously, we're gonna try to switch things up every once in a while with our drafts because even though there's a lot of drafts, it is a fine number, and it's nice to kind of change things up every once in a while. But for now, we're back to what we know.
So, sounds good. Always a pleasure, John. And see you guys next time.
Bye, everybody. Hey guys, John here. We recorded this podcast already, but I made a mistake and did not recap our picks, so I am going to do that now. Team John goes Peyton Manning, Charles Woodson, Jeff Saturday, London Fletcher, Keith Brooking, Matt Burke, Olin Kreutz, Jeremiah Trotter, Amon Green, and Trey Thomas. And Team Jason goes Randy Moss, Alan Faneca, Heinz Ward, Matt Hasselbeck, Takeo Spikes, Fred Taylor, Flozell Adams, Patrick Sertan, Greg Ellis, and Samari Roll. And hopefully, I will not keep forgetting to do recaps. But yeah.